All right, what's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to be basically breaking down how we took one of our clients, Brightside Automates, to scale from $30,000 a month in January, and then we scaled them all the way to $156,000 in revenue generated in about 30 days, and while doing that, maintaining a 76% show rate and 48% close rate throughout the month. Because a lot of people assume that the solution to scaling a business is mostly that you increase ad spend or run more campaigns, but in reality, for most businesses, and for example, Brightside, they already had enough leads flowing into the system. The real problem for them was just what would happen after the lead entered the pipeline. So what I'm going to do is walk you guys through exactly what we looked at, like the bottlenecks we found and what was going on that prevented them originally from getting to this point, and what we did and the systems that we restructured to dramatically increase the revenue without needing to really increase the lead volume. And once the systems were rebuilt, you can see the jump was pretty quick, in revenue within a pretty short time. So first, for a little context about the actual company, Brightside Automates. Essentially, they were a growth consulting company that focused on helping service-based businesses improve their operations through automation and AI. And their offer is pretty much built around helping companies streamline operations and increase efficiency while creating more predictable growth. So before we even started working together with them, they had already built a solid foundation. They had a clear offer. And for the most part, they were generating leads through the funnel they had in place. But even with all those pieces working for the business, they still were essentially plateauing around $30,000 a month. And this is something we see pretty often with service businesses once they would hit, a certain revenue level. But for the most part with Brightside, the main things that were actually holding them back and why they were, stuck and where they were stuck was the actual revenue being stuck because of the conversions not converting well. And the backend systems were extremely messy. So the business was essentially sitting around $28,000 per month in that range, which means the business wasn't, failing, but it also wasn't scaling because the leads were coming in, sales calls were being booked. And when we started digging deeper into the backend systems, we figured out why they weren't converting as well as they could have been. It was pretty clear that a lot of the infrastructure, for the business around the leads, wasn't optimized yet, and things like the CRM organization, lead follow-up, nurture sequences, the speed to lead, they were all areas that had room for improvement. And all these types of issues were tending to create friction through the whole acquisition process from what we saw. Now, once we performed a full audit of the actual acquisition system, a few main bottlenecks became extremely obvious to us. The first one being the actual speed to lead, because it's a pretty known thing in sales that when a person puts in an application or puts something to opt in, that first 5 minutes after doing that is the best time to get in contact with them because they are in peak buying state. And in most service businesses, the faster a lead is contacted after they submit information, the higher the conversion rate would be. But because they had leads sitting in there for hours before someone would even follow up or get in contact with them, the chances of that lead converting were dropping dramatically. Now, the second actual bottleneck that we found was the actual CRM organization. Leads were coming in the system, but they weren't even being categorized or routed at all. There were zero automations in place, which meant sales opportunities were getting buried and left out on when they could have been converted and turned into a high ticket client. Now, the third issue for the most part was the show rate. Even when the calls were getting booked, not every prospect was showing up consistently, because for the most part, what we saw over the previous months, they were sitting at about 30 to 50% show rate, while they could have been sitting at a 70% if they had the right nurture sequences in place and a post-booking page that would have built more credibility for them, so that way the lead knew who they were and what they did. Because like I said, not being able to warm these leads up before they reached the sales conversation, it was causing a huge drop-off. And we had a huge issue with people not even understanding what the offer was in full. Now, when you stack all these things together, they created a huge drop-off in overall conversion throughout the entire funnel. Now, the big shift that changed everything was realizing it wasn't even, a problem around lead generation. It was that the leads already coming in, for the most part, needed to be converted faster and have a better nurturing process. So what needed to be really improved was the actual funnel, the better speed to lead, better nurturing, and then a better sales process overall to actually close the deals and whenever that first point of contact was happening. So the first step that we started with was completely rebuilding their acquisition system. So that meant rebuilding the actual front end, and that started with the actual funnel. So the goal of the funnel wasn't just capturing, every lead we could. We wanted to filter and qualify which prospects were, going to be buyers and who was actually interested, while positioning the offer correctly. So we redesigned the landing page, and while they had all the ad spend they were doing, we wanted them to be funneled in to a correct funnel. So we redesigned the landing page to show what the offer was more clearly and set expectations for the type of clients that we wanted to work with. So we had a high engaging landing page where we would have a strong caption, a solid scripted VSL, and then a quick application process. Now with that application process that we had a huge qualification to filter who was a buyer versus who wasn't a buyer. Then on top of that, we would gather exactly what information we needed from them, like their email, phone number, name, before they would even move forward. So this would help the sales team understand who they were speaking with, and it would ensure that the people booking calls were actually qualified prospects. So once the application was completed, the lead would automatically be pushed into the CRM as a qualified opportunity. Now, the next major improvement that we had in place was taking those leads and zapping them into the CRM. So instead of having those leads sitting randomly in the system, we created a structured pipeline that would move the leads from different stages to the next. So all the fresh leads would be contacted first, and all the leads who hadn't responded yet would be put into follow-up buckets. So that way we wouldn't miss out on any single lead that didn't answer the first phone call or text. And all the leads who missed their calls were entered into a recovery sequence designed to reschedule them on calls as well. So the structure would ensure that every single lead in the system had a clear next step or was going to a new pipeline. So that dramatically reduced the number of opportunities that fell through the cracks. Now, the reason this was so strict and the reason this worked so efficiently was because the dialers and setters we had on the team had to follow a strict SOP. So that included having all the frameworks, all the scripts, having the calendars, the resources, pre-call asset pages, the application tags, everything they needed in a full breakdown SOP of what a dialing process would look like from the time a lead came in the pipeline to the time they would call to the last step of booking them onto a closing call where the closer would come in and make the deal. So by putting this in place, the setters knew exactly what they needed to do, how fast they needed to be to get that speed to lead in the first 5 minutes and actually convert these into booked calls. And by managing this team to the highest level and making sure they were on point every single day, that's what eventually led to us hitting that $156,000 month. So once the dialers were actually converting and then booking them onto GEA strategy calls, whether it was manually or whether they had booked directly through the funnel because they were qualified and they were a good lead. So that way when they booked or they got booked, it would be a pretty clear and easy process to actually get them on, have the sequences get shot out to them with putting it on their calendar and then also having it in their email and text messages. So now all the leads that we had were getting booked, and we had, for the most part, a pretty high booking rate from lead to book call. But now we needed to actually increase the show rate because for the most part, they were sitting at around a 40% show rate, which was pretty terrible. So another major factor that we actually used was improving the show rate through automated sequences and automated messages, follow-ups, and a nurturing process. Because a lot of businesses like Brightside lose a surprising amount of revenue just because prospects fail to show up on these scheduled calls. Even though they might buy a low-ticket product and they don't get on that high-ticket call, they're losing out on thousands of dollars. So on top of implementing a structured reminder system, once a call would get booked, the prospect would receive a direct email sequence that would have all the way up to their call 8 different emails nurturing them, handling objections, and then showing them exactly what we do, how it was possible, and all of the things they would need before that call. And all these reminders would reinforce the value of the conversation and keep, that call on the top of their mind. Now, the final process that we actually used to nurture these leads and make sure to the highest level that they would show up on these calls is we added a extremely strong confirmation page where we had a whole video breaking down what we did like we did in those emails, and then also having breakout videos under that to handle objections the same way those emails would do, but on a video form. So now we had a high-performing confirmation page. We handled all their objections. We explained clearly what we were going to be showing them on the call and what was going to happen. And now prospects were becoming warmer and getting more into that buying phase. So as the system became more organized, the quality of the sales conversations improved significantly, and our closers were making way more deals. With the sales team having much better context about who they were speaking with, the exact leverage they needed to turn them into a paying customer, all these combinations would lead to a stronger close rate. So instead of only having about a 20% close rate, now we were averaging in the upper 40%, which was leading to a much higher cash collected amount. Now, the results of all these improvements was scaling them from about $30,000 per month to $156,000 in roughly 30 days. And again, the key takeaway here is that the growth didn't just come from simply increasing lead volume. It came from fixing all the systems that moved the leads throughout the business and how we were converting them. And once we were starting to collect all these payments and the leads were starting to convert and go through the onboarding process, our fulfillment was being held to the highest level. So that way we would have more referrals and bring in more leads into the pipeline, which would also convert at a higher rate as well. So the good thing about having all this done and starting to collect $41,000 in revenue on just a random Monday was that we completely changed this entire business and the way they were able to convert all their sales. So if you have any type of coaching business or you're running a business at all, reach out to me on Instagram. My DMs are open and we can get some sort of audit done and chat about this. So other than that, that's everything we had in place to convert these deals at the highest level, have the most amount of prospects into cash, and then provide them with the fulfillment that they needed and wanted. But other than that, thank you for watching. If you had any other questions, just drop a comment on this video.